with the ear thing.
Oh yeah.
How does Alan Jones do it? That's what I want to know.
Yes, it's a level of professionalism we're clearly not quite acquainted with here at the Voices for Nature podcast. Sitting in my case, in the back room of my house, trying to make it as much like a studio as I can.
Far fancier than we are.
Yeah, I need to hear some scratch mix sounds now.
Now, we used to call this podcast Cocktails, but I don't have a cocktail on me.
No, sounds dangerous.
And it's also no longer called Cocktails, so appropriate.
Yeah.
We've got to bring it back. All right. Well, I think we've got our crowd with us, so let's make a start. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Voices for Nature podcast. My name's Chris Gambian.
And I'm Jackie Mumford.
The latest scientific reports on climate change have spurred the United Nations to formally call for a rapid phase out of coal, which makes you wonder why the New South Wales government is conducting a consultation to issue new coal exploration licences. Over the last decade, we've seen a string of new coal mines rejected by the planning system or withdrawn after sustained community opposition. Caroona, Shenhua, Bylong, Rocky Hill, more recently Angus Place, Hume Coal. They've all been stopped. But casting a shadow on this good news is the approval of massive expansions to existing coal mines, including the new Whitehaven mine that has been approved today. One of the areas in the government sites is Rylstone in central West New South Wales, which is calculated to contain 910 million tonnes of coal. So, Jackie, coal exploration in New South Wales, who are we talking to today?
Yeah, that's right. So we've got some wonderful guests this evening. We're joined by Janet Walk from the Rylstone Region Coal-Free Community Group, a new member group to NCC. So we're very excited to have Rylstone join us as a member group. Janet's a committee member for the Rylstone Region Coal-Free Group, who were formed specifically to stop new coal exploration licences being issued for the Rylstone area. The quiet area has found itself on the front liner of the campaign to stop coal in New South Wales, as you just mentioned, Chris. We're also joined by Craig Shaw. Craig was living in the Bylong Valley, where he found himself in the exploration area of a new neighbour, the Korean energy giant KEPCO, who wanted to build a giant coal mine next door. And adjacent, but a little further to the west, where former ministers Eddie O'Beid and Ian MacDonald were deeply involved in corrupting a new coal exploration licence. And Craig has been indefatigable in fighting coal proposals in the planning system, the media, and in his community. Having moved to Kandos near Rylstone, he now has a new fight on his hands. So thanks for joining us, Craig. And finally, we have Nick Clyde from Lock the Gate. Nick works to analyse and fiercely oppose proposals for new and expanding coal mines as part of the Lock the Gate Alliance. Lock the Gate formed a decade ago as farmers and others fought to keep rampaging coal and gas companies from forcing their way onto the land to explore for fossil fuels. It's since grown into a formidable campaign organisation that keeps a close eye on proposals for coal and gas and supports community opposition, just like the group in Rylstone. So welcome, guys. Lovely to have you here.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Our first question tonight is just to get a sense of Rylstone. Janet, I know you're a local. It'd be great if you could just tell us a bit about the area. Where is it and why do you love it so much there?
Well, first of all, I'd like to say I'm on Wiradjuri country and to acknowledge the past and present ancestors. So thank you very much for inviting me. Rylstone is a town of about 3,000 people, including Kandos. It's called Rylstone, the Rylstone Kandos, it's 5 k's away from each other. Largely, when I moved here 25 years ago, it was largely just a sleepy little town with a lot of agriculture, that is sheep, cattle, some horse studs, and Kandos had the cement works. So it had a mixture of industrial and agricultural and service industries. But in the last 15 years, it's grown in its vibrancy with a lot of tourism. People come because we're on the doorstep to the Wallamai National Park and the state forests, the Corricudgee State Forest, and its landscape is beautiful. So we have a lot of eco-tourist operations. You can go kayaking on the Cudgegong River. So the tourism has grown up around that. Also, a very heavily populated viticulture industry, big olive groves. So it's like sometimes I can't get a park in the town on a Saturday morning. This tiny little sleepy town is exploded with vibrancy. Coffee shops, knick-knack shops, scented candles, wool shops. It's, and it's kind of, there's a fair artisan, population, arty, music, things like that. So we're determined to keep that as it is, and of course that brings in a lot of money to the economy. But the money isn't the thing. It's not about. It's about the vibrancy and the communication and the fabric. It's very optimistic, the town. Oh, it is, despite COVID even. So it's a very tight-knit community. People look after each other. So everybody, small enough that everybody pretty much knows each other. So yeah, that's what it's like.
Yeah, beautiful.
Craig, you've got a fair bit of experience with fighting back against the expansion of coal. Why is this happening now? How do we win? How do we win this?
Look, there are probably only a couple of lessons, like fundamental lessons I've learnt over this time. One is, it sounds really dumb and blunt, blunt as in not very sharp as a tool, but is to delay. Is to make things take longer and to make sure proper processes are followed. So, my practical experience with different mining companies has been, to one degree or another, they tend to cut corners or want to gloss over things or don't want to have to take things too closely to heart. I mean, that varies between company, obviously, but that means you've always got to be watching. I mean, I didn't grow up to be watching coal mines and when they comply with things, but that's how it is. You've got to be watching and you've got to be making sure they toe the line, do the right thing. And, I say drag it out, but I don't mean just mindlessly drag it out to be, obstructionist. I just mean that the longer things take, the more the world is changing and the more things are on our side. That's number one. Number two is, what I have found really important and really exciting is this kind of networking, semi-coordinated approach between multiple groups now. So Lock the Gate didn't exist 10 years ago when we kind of started the fight with KEPCO. We had some connection with different groups around the place, but now I kind of call it conscious interoperability or conscious, collective whatever, where people are doing their own thing, pushing in the way that they want to do it, but doing it in a way that other people understand what they're about and can assist, So it's not a top-down thing at all. It's very kind of community, network, every angle, everything. And that's the other key thing I've learned. So one is the strategy level, make them do it properly and make sure it's done right and extend the time. But in terms of a functional approach, then it's really about working in networks as much as possible. And I think the groups have gotten a lot better at doing that themselves in terms of networking with each other and being able to spontaneously do things to say, oh, well, maybe we can do this with you guys or whatever. They're my two takeouts.
Yeah. Thanks, Craig. And like that sort of cooperative working together approach that you talk about, we know how important that is for so many of these sort of small community campaigns, and something that we're really excited about at Nature Conservation Council as a peak body. So it's great to have the Rylstone group joining us as a member.
Can I just say one thing to that is the point that you need a local group to really be the spearhead of the local issue.
Absolutely.
Right? Yep. They need to be the custodians to make that happen and push. But it's a very different world now if there's a local group that forms than it used to be because of this strength of networking and interconnection.
Yeah. And maybe that that sort of taps into a question that I'm keen to ask Janet and also you, Craig, is when this proposal was put forward to open the region up to coal mining, what happened in Rylstone? How did the sort of community group come about, and what was the local reaction?
Well, we didn't. I moved out here to ride horses. That's I didn't intend to be a coal activist. One day, locked the gate. I think I got something in the mailbox saying the Department of Planning in Energy, Environment and Industry have decided to release this area, to have some discussions about releasing the area for coal mining. There was a meeting called in the town hall. A lot of people went because it was the first we knew of it. We'd sort of heard something about a year ago, but thought, oh, well, that'll go away because, the world's moving away from coal, etc. But no, this was going to happen. And we heard from Craig. Craig was the instigator of that. And so, I don't know, probably about 100 people, 70, 80, 100 people went and got onto the, copped on, as they say in Ireland. We found out that this was actually going to happen. So the next thing we started about a month before the Department of Planning had sent out letters to say they're going to have community meetings, and the meetings were described as like there'll be 3 of them and they'll be capped at 50 to allow for more discussion, which you really wonder how that allows more discussion rather than having 150 people at the meeting. It's just, so they were going to be capped at 50 and there's going to be 3 meetings and that's 150 people. And we got on to them and said, no, you can't do this. You've got to send letters out to the whole community. This is going to affect 3,000 people. So we were and that only came because we had the confidence to do that from our meetings together of, like discussing it and saying that this is going to affect the Chamber of Commerce, the candle shops in town, they'll, it affects every business in town, changes the complete culture. The viticulturists, they're expanding, putting things in there, the olive groves, everybody. So we got that head start, and then we're able to sort of push them back a bit and argue successfully for more time. What's more, we said, no, you have to notify via letterbox drop everybody in the whole area. Now, it wasn't something that they we'll have to go and see if we can get that. And it was like, well, you can't call this community engagement if you notify 150 landholders. And that's how it started. And since then, it's grown, our group's grown, and we did get an extension of time to put submissions in. So the DPI came to us and said, we'll have some discussions, and then as part of this PRIA process, PRIA meaning what's called prior regional interest assessments. So that was supposed to be the whole thing. They we give them, what we think about it, and then they go away. But we said, no, hang on a minute. You've got a process here. We should be involved in every level of
absolutely
the whole process.
Yeah.
The mining companies are. So we should be where the community. As a matter of fact, this was one of the recommendations of the ICAC report, by ICAC Royal Commission in 2013. It was one of those. So while they did sort of pay lip service to it, we'll have a community engagement meeting. That was where we were supposed to get off the bus. But we have since said, no, we want that published. We want your report as a result of the submissions published.
Absolutely.
No, we can't do that. No, we can't do that. That's not how it's done. And we said, well, what do you mean how it's done? This is the first, in-depth PRIA. So we need to decide how it's done. anyway, we haven't got that published yet, but they are going to put the submissions up online, which they weren't going to do that on their portal. So
it's fantastic. I just want to come, Janet. I might just, I just want to throw it out to Nick, but to get a bit of a bigger picture view of all of this. I mean, I guess the context that we haven't talked about here is this is a climate emergency. The one thing that we know is that we need to be burning less coal, less fossil fuels across the board. What's the state of play in New South Wales at the moment, Nick, with the coal mining and the future of the coal mining industry?
Yeah, well, look, thanks for the question, Chris, and thanks for having me on this podcast. I'm coming to you guys from Gadigal country here in Sydney. Yeah, I guess the bigger context is still a bit depressing. I mean, we've had a good few weeks with some great decisions. Great news about Bylong the other day, a tremendous result in the Southern Highlands with the Hume Coal mine finally being refused consent after an 11-year-long campaign that was very similar to the Bylong campaign in many ways. So there's absolutely some fantastic momentum in the community and amongst groups and affected communities fighting these projects. But the unfortunate reality is that since the Rocky Hill decision back in 2018, when the Land and Environment Court heard expert evidence from the climate scientists and the local community and the economists who said, look, we have enough coal already approved globally to burn. If we're going to meet our climate targets, we can't afford to be opening new mines. So unfortunately, what's happened in New South Wales since then are multiple coal projects being approved, some of them new, some of them extensions, Maxwell Underground, Mangoola, the Vickery decision approved by the feds today, Maxwell Underground. And unfortunately, at a policy level here in New South Wales, the government still hasn't indicated that it has any appetite whatsoever to have a conversation with coal miners and say, look, we do need to preserve a safe climate. It's time we ended new coal projects and coal expansions.
Yeah. And Janet, you sort of started to touch on the amazing strength of the community coming together in the face of this proposal. And Craig, we know that you've been up against this kind of threat before, and the community campaign you were involved with previously in Bylong. And often these campaigns against coal can go on for many years. How much strain does this put on a community? And overall, do you think it brings people together, or can it be divisive for local communities?
Yes, that's the answer. One thing I'd say quickly to add to what Janet said before, what in Bylong, and typically if there's any kind of exploration area announced or new initiative to open up areas, the landholders are usually the last to know. There'll be a small ad in a paper about stuff. We saw that happen recently with Whitehaven Applications near Narrabri. A small ad appears about wanting to explore, and then people find out after the fact. And one of the things that motivated me in relation to Rylstone was to turn that on its head and take the opportunity through our experiences of learning how to find out this information, put the landholders front and centre, and put them in the box seat early on so they doesn't catch them by surprise. The answer is that if you're not careful, well, there are a couple of answers. One is in terms of the process. Mining companies and the way they approach things, it ends up being quite divisive in a community as they try to establish their foothold. It's a classic, cuckoo in the nest thing, where they come in and establish a footprint and then expand, and you get people who are pro and anti, and it can be difficult, and it can be unfortunate. All kinds of tensions happen, and communities get decimated before even a sod of soil is turned. Right, so that is a real problem. At the same time, what it can do is it kind of, the people who are keen can be kind of forged and welded together then through that experience. It's a shared kind of adversity. They learn to work with each other. They develop a knowledge base. They become, tougher and more formidable, if you like. That's the best kind of outcome that can happen. And I have to say, through this whole process where, 10 years or more, I mean, you don't pick the fight picks you, right? You find yourself in this position where you feel like you have to do something. But through all this, I've met the most wonderful people through these networks, people who have become really close, true friends. And that is, one piece, that's one sort of silver edge to what it otherwise can be a fairly shitty and grinding experience. And why should it be my problem? I mean, I didn't go there to go and fight coal mines. Why do I have to know about how exploration licenses work or the IPC process or expert evidence? And give me my brain space back,
Yeah, that's right. It's not necessarily that you've chosen to be an activist. It's that it's come up on your doorstep.
There's a question here from Simone, who's just put a question into the chat, and it's sort of something that I was interested in as well, which is, on the one hand, in New South Wales politics, we've got people like Minister Keane talking about the move to renewables, the energy roadmap that we saw last year, which was really terrific and getting New South Wales well and truly off coal power. Just last week, Matt Keane said on radio that he thought that we would be out of coal power by 2030. We had the Land and Environment Court make that landmark ruling a couple of weeks ago about the EPA needing to consider climate in its deliberations and to set policies for climate. So on the one hand, there is some positive movement, but on the other hand, there are these proposals for new coal fields. Who's in charge? Who's calling the shots in New South Wales? Where is the pressure towards the coal industry coming from in New South Wales?
Oh, that's definitely a Nick question.
Well, look, I would say, my answer to that would be, I think the coal industry said to the government, look, we're happy for you to play in the renewable energy sandpit, but don't mess with our coal mining and get out of the way when we want to open new mining projects or expand existing mines. I think there's a complete disconnect. And I think there's an absurd situation at the moment that the government's engineered where the planning department will have sort of outsourced decisions on new coal projects to the Independent Planning Commission. But when you talk to the Independent Planning Commission, they say, hey, look, we're just operating within laws and the policy environment that's set by the government. So we can only do so much in this space. So, no one's responsible. In the meantime, the coal industry continues to expand and approvals continue to be made. And, right now there's a fresh expansion at the Boggabri coal project that's being assessed. So I think it's largely business as usual at the moment. And unfortunately, the good work of the renewable energy push can be undermined by these coal approvals. We had Professor Ian Lowe took a look at this very, very recently and working with Lock the Guard, and we discovered that just the direct emissions generated here in New South Wales from coal mining, so that's a lot of methane from the mines and lots of diesel fuel burnt to dig up the coal, and the electricity to power the operations. So just those direct emissions, forget about the coal being burnt, was roughly equivalent to the 90 million tonnes that Matt Keane's Renewable Energy Initiative expects to save by 2030. So that's the scale that we're talking about. It's a significant problem.
It's an extraordinary amount of emissions for not necessarily an awful lot of benefit.
Well, and they're just the emissions from the new projects that have been approved in the last 3 years. So we're not even talking about the 16 million tonnes per annum from the existing industry.
Yeah. So did you want to add something there? Sorry, Janet.
I was just going to say, I'm speaking for myself. This isn't a position that that we've discussed even at the RCFC, but in terms of the conversation we should be having as a state or as a nation is how are we going to find work for these communities? Like the National Party keeps saying, "Oh, well, I'm not going to. What is it? I'm not going to ask the regions to bear the cost of this." Well, you feel like saying, "Well, don't. Then find this transition." There are as many jobs in renewables now as there are in coal. That's how far it's come. Now, a third of those in mining aren't skilled enough to make transitions, like the electricians and the technicians and the engineers. They will need to be retrained. Now's the time to say to the mining companies, okay, you've made millions of profit. You are now to 1 day a week is upskilling these kids to be able to transition out, make them electricians, boilermakers, whatever is going to be needed in the renewable energy sector. That's this conversation they should be having if they don't want the regions to be paying, if they don't want the regions to collapse, because it is the way of looking after people and communities. We talk about the community of Bylong just being without a sod being turned. Well, there is going to be lots of communities decimated as the dominoes start to fall, and we know that's coming. But that's the conversation those politicians, Matt Keane and his colleagues, need to be having.
Yeah, how do we have those?
And it's completely absent, and it's abrogating the it's a lie that they don't want this to fall on the regions. It's a lie. That they do not want to stand up to fossil fuel companies. They don't want that.
Yeah,
that's why I think they should
plans in place to properly transition. Craig, Bylong's come up a couple of times. Can you just say a little bit about what happened this week, and what that means for the future of the project? Is that it now? Is it done for good?
I can talk about things to some degree, and Nick may need to help me with some of this stuff as well. At the decision on Monday was to knock back the appeal that KEPCO made to the judgment when they appealed the IPC decision in the first place, right? So mine was knocked back by the IPC, then they appealed, they lost that appeal, they've appealed again. That was a pretty comprehensive defeat. It was a unanimous decision. The three judges have agreed on all the key points. It was also very important in terms of consolidating a view of how certain sections of the EP&A Act interact with the mining SEP. That clarified a lot of that stuff, and that's going to be very important addition to what we understand about the law moving forward. Now, in terms of what happens next, KEPCO can seek leave to appeal to the High Court. They don't have a right to go to the High Court to appeal, but they could seek leave. Even if they seek leave, they have to get that granted. And then if they have it granted, they've got to be able to be successful in the appeal. We don't know. They've got 28 days to do that. Now, assuming that doesn't happen, then I think there are three basic options, and then I'll sort of throw to Nick. One is that KEPCO kind of walk away and sell the properties they've bought. They've bought, 13,000 hectares of property, and that's a big, big chunk of stuff. They could sell it back and just walk away. Whether they'll do that or not, I don't know. There'll be pressure from Korea, I suspect, to get things in order, as it were. But more likely would seem to be a desire to try and sell it as a package deal to someone who might buy it. So they'd sell the land and the exploration license and all their IP and everything they've learnt from the process of exploring and so on. They could do that as a bundled deal. They'd obviously still lose money on all the stuff they've expended, but they would get them more money than just trying to sell the land by itself. And then a further alternative might be that there's some kind of deal with the government, that the government puts its hand in its pocket and provides some money to help them exit and sell the land back. I should also say there's one other thing they could do. They could come back with an entirely new project. It's a bit like, you didn't like the 20-story version, how about the 15-story version? They could try and do that, but I don't know how likely that is. Nick, would you like to add to any of that?
Thanks, Craig. I mean, all I'd like to say really is that I just think there's a tremendous opportunity for KEPCO, which is a majority government-owned energy company in South Korea, to work with Australia, to work with the Bylong farmers and do something really interesting, not sell that project to another coal company, but work with the farming community who are interested in regenerative agriculture. There's some really awesome nature conservation opportunities with those properties as well. So this is a huge opportunity to really look beyond coal at, well, where do we go next? How do we rebuild communities? There's a beautiful Wiradjuri country there. How do we work with First Nations communities and,
Plus if I could butt in for a second, plus, Tarwin Park is the home of natural sequence farming. It's in the middle of that.
Yeah, the globally significant regenerative restorative agricultural technique was pioneered in Bylong. So we're kind of working with some groups in South Korea, testing the waters with, there's been a change of management in Seoul. So yeah, we're hopeful that as a community, as a movement, working with all of you guys, with the Rylstone mob, the Bylong mob, the NCC, and others, that there might be some positive interest there, and we can see a really different future for Bylong going forward.
Thanks so much, Nick, and thanks so much, Janet and Craig, for being with us this afternoon. Unfortunately, we're just about out of time, but if everybody listening is now riled up about Rylstone, how can people support? Janet?
Well, they can write letters to their politicians. Look, this decision will be made by the Minister for Regions, but he will be guided by Cabinet. So any of the Cabinet ministers, be it health, be it planning, be it environment, who else is in Cabinet? So look, if you write to those politicians, that would be fantastic, because that is our go on, Craig. What were you going to say?
I was going to say one of the most obvious things is to go to the Rylstone Region Coal-Free Community website, which is just rylstonecfc.com, and anything that's happening with the campaign will be posted there, and people can join the mailing list, join the group, keep up to date with what's happening, and understand where the group thinks the most useful pressure can be applied. I would just encourage them to go to there's some fantastic resources there. I'd encourage them to go to the website.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thanks to all three of you for joining us tonight. And I'm sure the Rylstone group, if you've got a few dollars to chip in, could probably use a few donations as well to keep the campaign going. These things don't pay for themselves. Likewise, as always, at the end of this episode, you're going to get, if you're on the Zoom call, you're going to get pushed across to a page where you can chip in a few dollars to the Nature Conservation Council, which is how we keep all of our campaigns going. Just in the last week or so, you might have heard the news of the absurd proposal to reopen a wood chip export terminal at Newcastle to send Australia's or New South Wales's native forests as wood chip over to Japan for, of all things, energy, if you can believe that. So we're campaigning pretty hard to make sure that proposal never does see the light of day. And of course, all of our work is there on our website, nature.org.au, for you to have a look at. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Jackie. Enjoy your evening.
Thanks, guys. Lovely to talk to you.
Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you.
Thanks, NCC.